Good morning, Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, fellow debaters. Let me just say what a pleasure it is for me to be part of this very topical debate. Nigeria has experienced both the presidential and the parliamentary system of government from 1960 to July 1966, 6 years and 3 months. It's probably a bit longer than that if you count the parliamentary system that operated in the eastern region and the western region between 1957 and 1960, and the system that operated in the northern region from 1959. So probably about 10 years which we've operated that system. We've also operated the presidential system, which we still operate today. Now, before I go on to let you say why I support the motion, I think it's important to understand the essential characteristics of both systems. The decisive difference lies in the relationship between the executive and the legislature. And we've heard that ultimately it really depends on the people, the operators of the system, that determine how well it will work. However, I would submit that the characteristics of the parliamentary system are such that it gives you the better chance of success. We heard that we started the parliamentary system in 1960 and it all blew up in our face. There was none of the reasons for the events of 1966, the Western crisis and so on, had anything to do with the parliamentary system per se. Now, the difference, as I said, the essential difference is that the president in a presidential system is directly elected by the people, the electorate, the entire electorate, for a specific term, no extension and no abridgment. Of course, we've seen places in Uganda where the system has been manipulated and the term has been extended. We had an experience here where there was an effort to extend the term. In the like manner, the legislature, the members of the legislature are also elected by their various constituencies. So there's an independent, legitimate power or an authority that's derived from the electorate in both systems. Unlike the stark contrast of the parliamentary system, where the prime minister is selected from within the legislature. It's the legislature chooses amongst the parliamentarians the most competent, and usually it is the most competent of the parliamentarians to lead where there's a majority of the party, the majority recognizes that, and that's why they have the electoral college system, to ensure that the popular will does not choose a president that is incompetent or is incapable of governance. And that's why politically wise people in all the states get together and determine who is president. The second point I want to raise is the fact that in Nigeria we have sectional leaders. We don't, and that's not to say that all our leaders are sectional in their thinking, but because of our diversity, there is a profound suspicion of a leader having such enormous powers as vested by Section 5 of our Constitution. And so, hence the requirement for rotation based on ethnicity and religion. It's this profound suspicion that makes the parliamentary system more suitable, where there's a consensus, there's a collective. The second point I want to raise is regarding the parliamentary system, in terms of accountability, has a mandatory open debate. You see it in the British Parliament, where the president, the executive, the prime minister has to come before the public and defend his actions, his inactions, his decisions. He's questioned in public and he has to account for it. I can think of so many situations where that system would have been better, rather than speculating as to why is the president not doing this or why he's not doing that. He has to come and answer to the people. So that creates accountability, greater accountability. And of course you have the shadow cabinet. So you have people who are putting each of their counterparts on the spot. Efficiency. The idea that the president is elected by the entire electorate is only in theory. In fact, he is subject to the parliament, the legislature, and of course, as we've seen, their private interests. And therefore the president very often has to compromise the public interest in order to promote his agenda. Unlike the parliamentary system, where it's a collective, it builds consensus building, the prime minister has to persuade his colleagues in parliament, and it's basically they're on the same team, and the agenda is therefore much more easy to pursue. It's the difference between primacy and supremacy. The presidential system creates a president that is supreme. He is the authority. The prime minister is a first among equals. Stability. The president cannot be removed except by impeachment unless he dies or resigns. Very few presidents resign. We only saw President Nixon, and even that was under enormous pressure. The power of impeachment is what we will hear is the other side of that. Of 46 presidents in the United States, and we borrowed our system from the United States, only 2 were impeached in the entire history of the United States, and neither of them was removed. So the president basically has this term that is secure. Now, a president usually will seek re-election, as most presidents do. Some of them want a 3rd term. And when he seeks election and gets elected for the 2nd term, he's no longer accountable. He doesn't have to go back to the people to ask for their votes. So he can start acting arbitrarily. He can start doing things because he doesn't have an election to worry about. Now, the parliamentary system has the vote of no confidence, and that's perhaps one of the strongest arguments against the parliamentary system, and the suggestion that in Nigeria, the parliamentary system, you would have a vote of no confidence every week. That is not the case. We've run the parliamentary system for 10 years, as I pointed out. Prime Minister Balewa was not removed after 1 week. He was there for 6.5 years. So it simply does not stand to the evidence that that's the case. And if you look at other systems we borrowed from, the British Prime Minister, in the last 17 years, there have been 3 Prime Ministers. In the last 17 years. Since the Second World War, there have been 15 Prime Ministers. That's 70 years. So it simply does not stand up to the facts that that is the case. Now I come to the issue of corruption, which Professor Shenka talked about. Yes, it depends on who is the people who operate the system. But one system clearly is more transparent and more open and lends itself more to accountability. Corruption. If we look at the countries on Transparency International's list, and I use Transparency International advisedly, if you look at the 30 least corrupt countries in the world, 23 are parliamentary systems. The least corrupt. 3 are presidential systems, and 4 have monarchies or some sort of hybrid. Let's take a wider pool. The 50 most corrupt, 33 of the most corrupt countries are in the presidential system because of the enormity of power vested in one man. So it creates an incentive for people to try and influence that man, to try and get whatever the interest they have, business interest and so on. And if you look at the other side, of the least corrupt, it's the same thing. The statistics show that of the larger pool, 33 of 50 are in the most corrupt countries are presidential. And with the other point is if we're going back to the point I made about the stability, if we take stability, rebutting the point made that the vote of no confidence will make the government unstable. If we look at just a few countries, Britain, 3 prime ministers in the last 17 years, 12 since 1955, 15 since World War II. Germany, 2 chancellors in 16 years. Canada, 3 prime ministers in 21 years. So it simply doesn't stand to the test that the parliamentary system is inherently unstable. Now, there are a few exceptions, Japan, Italy, and Portugal recently, where there's been a large turnover. But usually you'll find that in those systems, party rules. For example, in Italy, elections must be held every 2 years, until recently when it was 3 years. So there's a tendency for there to be a change of government frequently. But the fact is, across parliamentary systems across the world, it is simply not true that the leadership is changed. Because they have to, they want to win. The party wants to stay in power, so they put their best hand forward. And so the focus is on competence rather than popularity. And we can see in the parliamentary system, some of the leaders in parliamentary systems are not charismatic and popular orators and so on, as you have in some situations. They're competent economists or competent people because the party wants to win and must put its best foot forward. You have to stand in front of Parliament, stand in front of your opposing party, and defend your position. I think that's a system that we in Nigeria can benefit from. And finally, if we look at economic indices, take the G20. 16 out of 20 parliamentary systems. Now, one may argue that these are just statistics and you can do anything with them, but the fact of the matter is these are facts. 16 out of 20 of the G8 countries are parliamentary systems. The Human Development Index and the Economic Indexes of both the IMF and the UN show, within a margin of very small error, that parliamentary system provides for greater benefit to the people and greater benefit to the economy. And if you look at the opposite, look at the bottom rung of that list, you'll find that the countries with the least benefit to the people are countries that operate the presidential system. Clearly, the parliamentary system provides a significantly higher chance of economic success than the presidential system. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you to suggest that we should reject the motion that Nigeria will be better served by a parliamentary system of government. And in the 10 minutes that I have, I want to quickly give you some reasons why I believe that is so. The motion invites us to compare the parliamentary system to other forms of government, but it doesn't specify which forms of government we should compare it to. Better served by a parliamentary system relative to what other system? Presidential, my fellow panelists have assumed the presidential system, and they have given us arguments why they think, in fact, the parliamentary system is better than the presidential system. I will very quickly, in due course, dispute some of the arguments they have put forward. But we can also compare the parliamentary system to other types of governance other than the presidential system. So the main point I want to make at this point is that to be able to carry a motion like this, you must specify what you are comparing the parliamentary system to. And once you do that, the evidence becomes clear that the motion is untenable. And I want to demonstrate this by comparing the parliamentary system first to a monarchical system, and then to a presidential system, and finally to then see how, given the logic of the evidence before us, we should reject the motion. Why should we be talking of a monarchical system in Nigeria today? Since we are supposed to be democratic and modern and all the like. I believe that many of our traditional rulers have never stopped arguing for more powers under our constitution, and we shall hear more of it in the course of the next 3 months in Abuja. They make the kind of claims that the parliamentary system makes for itself. They are more representative of the people, they are closer to the people, they are more legitimate in the eyes of the people. So really we have to take their argument seriously and put it on the scale and see if it does warrant support, as it were. So the monarchical system claims to be closer to the people, to their political instincts, claims to be more familiar to them. And I'm sure those of you who followed the media, last week when Jonathan went to Namibia, and he turned up at the stadium in Windhoek, people addressed him as Igwe, not as president, because basically the instinct of the people, including the Namibian audience apparently, is the recognition of royalty, which is the argument that the monarchical people put forward. I should also add that all colonial administrations in Africa ruled through chiefs.